Basis. The Cuban Missile Crisis began on October 14, 1962, when American U-2 spy planes took pictures of a Soviet intermediate-range missile site being built in Cuba. The pictures were shown to John F. Kennedy on October 16, 1962. America was soon being posed with a serious nuclear threat. Kennedy faced an important problem. If the U.S. attacked the sites, it might lead to a nuclear war with the USSR, Soviet Union for short. But if the U.S. did nothing, it would continue the threat of nuclear weapons being fired from close range. He attacked them. Some people see Kennedy's attack on the USSR weapon base as a heroic and brave action. It was really a careless and risky action that put the whole world in jeopardy. Here's one of John F. Kennedy's speeches addressing the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Only last Thursday, as evidence of this rapid offensive buildup was already in my hand, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko told me in my office that he was instructed to make it clear once again, as he said his government had already done, that Soviet assistance to Cuba, and I quote, pursued solely the purpose of contributing to the defense capabilities of Cuba, unquote. That, and I quote him, training by Soviet specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved.
Even though it's true there were nuclear weapon sites located on Cuba, it is also possible that the nuclear weapon sites had absolutely nothing to do with America. Because Kennedy jumped to conclusions, it actually increased the possibility that we might go to war with Cuba. Meanwhile, this was going on in Cuba.
It had all begun a few years earlier in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where Castro and his growing band of guerrillas were gathering strength for their big push to overthrow Cuba's longtime dictator, Fulgencio Batista.
We gladly suffer cold and rain and the hardship of life in the mountains. This is only the beginning. The last battle will be fought in the capital. You can be sure.
This was no idle boast. Victory for the revolution came on New Year's Day, 1959. And in fact, the cheering in the streets of Havana was met with guarded approval in Washington, in the hope that this bearded new leader would be a force for democracy in Cuba. But within months after coming to power, reality overtook optimism, as Castro established his own brand of dictatorship with palpable leanings toward communism. Middle-class liberals in Cuba had formed a key faction in the anti-Batista rebellion, and now they were outraged by Castro's betrayal of their democratic goals.
Specialists of Cuban nationals in handling defensive armaments was by no means offensive. And that if it were otherwise, Mr. Gromyko went on, the Soviet government would never become involved in rendering such assistance, unquote. That statement also was false. Acting therefore in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound to Cuba, from whatever nation or port, will, if found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
Because of John F. Kennedy's decision to go with war with Cuba, he ended many, many lives, broken many families, and in my opinion, John F. Kennedy is just the old George W. Bush.